My name is Divya. I run a project called Fruity Walks, which is all about finding, mapping, and planting fruit trees in the city. And it began as a project of finding fruit trees for the novelty of it. I found some apple trees on my walks. I found some cherry trees. My mind was blown by that. And then actually I started finding lemon trees and avocado trees and grapefruit trees. And what began as a novelty, just posting it on Instagram, has evolved into a project of understanding who planted those trees, why are they there? And a lot of the times they're linked with beautiful immigration stories where people bring little pieces of their own home to their new home in London. And the final piece of it is planting orchards, and I've been lucky enough to be involved in planting 2 beautiful orchards in south of London around Bermondsey, with Trees for Bermondsey, the real estate and the council. We've been walking around Marylebone, Hyde Park, Green Park, and now St. James's Park. We've been focusing on olive trees in Crawford Street, and we've just been having a nice stroll, talking about a lot of walking and just finding new things. I think that's part of the walks. Sometimes you don't have to have everything planned and every tree scouted, but actually just going on a walk, you might find some really interesting things. So that's what we've been doing. In Crawford Street, such a random street, we found 20 plus olive trees. We don't really know exactly why they were planted, but they're in beautiful conditions, really well-established trees that are fruiting every year. And then in the major parks that we went through, Hyde Park, Green Park, St. James's Park, we haven't found that many. I mean, there's a huge fig tree here at the entrance of St. James's Park.
Where have we just come out of and where are we going?
We are in Paddington Street Gardens, and we're just taking a left towards Edgware, essentially. And we're going through, I believe, Crawford Street. At this point, we've already entered the street. And we're walking down because there's about 20 olive trees in the street, and they are huge.
Okay.
They're fruiting. Well, I don't know if they're fruiting right now, but all of my times that I've been here in the correct season, there's like the biggest black olives growing out of the trees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a really, I've never seen anything like this across London. They're so nice specifically because these couple of blocks around Crawford Street, there's no trees actually, like you see, it's all quite bare. And then suddenly we get to a point where it's just full of trees, and it's such a stark distinction between this just very building, very concrete-y, brick, to a lot of lushness and like olive trees as well. I would walk in lockdown, just like our daily walk, right? And it was in those walks that I started to identify a lot of fruit trees that were right next to my house that I just had never really thought about or seen. Yeah. Because that's the thing. In London, everybody's moving really quick. You go from one point to another, but actually the space in between is not something that people tend to focus on. So in these walks, I realized that it was actually a really nice route, and there was so many different fruit spots, free snacks. Yeah. And I love to do them as a walk rather than just the novelty, right? Okay, point 1, it's a fruit tree, it's an apple tree, okay, point 2. But through the walk, you get to connect with your community as well, connect with your surroundings. Yeah. And the walking bit is, it's great. It wouldn't be the same thing if you were doing it in a car.
And you've led walks then with kind of lots of different people coming along?
Yeah, definitely. There's been people from all ages, from all backgrounds. I've been lucky enough to get commissioned by different societies, the Linnean Society, or I've just partnered with Sounds Like Chaos and one of their artists there to do a walk. And it's amazing because the different crowds just bring so many different questions. There's sometimes, I remember some chefs in one of the walks, so they immediately saw some quince tree. And they were saying how they had made this quince soda and all of these different like concoctions. That was really cool. And then you get people that are coming from different countries. So there was a Greek lady in one of the walks, and she was saying how the fig trees in London sometimes are really hard, but actually you can use them, you can just put them in the oven and spread some honey on them and they work, and that's something really traditional in Greece as well. So yeah, different, it's been amazing. I learned so much from everybody that comes into these walks.
We've got trees appearing now. We're finding our first bit of trees we've seen on the street.
I think there's about 20 olive trees. They're very mature and like street trees. They're not pruned. But like you can see, they're very bushy. They're very healthy. And we have some that are a bit lower. But yeah, these are in the correct season. There's like the juiciest, biggest olives growing from them. I think this is not the time, but yeah, it's beautiful. We can see a little strandler there. They haven't fallen off. See, these ones are a bit like sort of rotten, right? Because they're done. But you can still see, yeah, so many like.
How much do you know about olive trees that, like, they do look like in such good health?
They do.
And we're in W1, which seems unlikely.
Exactly, honestly, and in the correct season, they do bear really, really big olives. They seem very well established. I mean, the trunks don't seem very thick, which from my experience in Spain, centenary olive trees, their branches get really, really big. So perhaps they're not that old, but I would say maybe a good 20 years at least. They're looking beautiful, to be honest.
This is quite a nice little street, and there's a lot of independent businesses. In fact, I'm barely seeing any chains at all. It's all independent. So there's a lot of history in this street, and like, should they know the history of the street? Is it something that kind of brings you as a community of shop owners or business owners together?
Completely. The history of the street, the history of the olive trees, the history of what's planted nearby, I think it would just add so much to everyone's understanding of where they are located, right? And it brings a lot more value. Suddenly, you're not just in Crawford Street, but you're in Crawford Street, which is blah, 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 blah from a history, and then there's been this sort of stewardship of olive trees and this street. I think each of the businesses could do something really special, knowing that fact. And adding to that fact, taking better care of the trees. I mean, in the florist that we just saw, they had a beautiful box around the tree.
Yeah.
And they were taking care, they had planted some companion plants next to it. If these other businesses also knew a little bit about the history of the olive trees, perhaps they would also start watering as well. And
I think that's some of the things that are the benefits when we do maps with footways, that we're taking some independent businesses and they're sharing a bit of information about themselves, a bit of their history, that hopefully their neighbours might learn something. You know, maybe that they've been there 100 years or something like that, or the building had a historical relevance. And actually creating these little maps, you're actually creating these little micro communities. So, and it isn't just about the history of the shop, it's kind of the history of the street and an unexpected nature, which is quite a fun thing. See, this is when you walk down a lovely street, and although this is a space created by a church, it's actually what we lack a little bit in sort of British cities, really, are these spaces that are away from the roads, and they're just
plaza. Yeah, like we have in Spain.
In Spain, you like lovely squares and everything like that, and then so we don't really have these in London. Everything was created before, or even certainly in industrial cities, there were never. The roads were just the way to get to work, to home and back forward. There was never these little spaces in between. And this really only exists probably accidentally because of this big old church. It's a nice
reminder or addition to the olive trees. That's such a Mediterranean tree, right? And then finding ourselves in a...
Well, hang on. This might be a clue. What's the church? St. Mary's, okay. Let's have a look. St. Mary's School. So we got a bit of a Catholic thing going on then, maybe. St. Mary's sounds a bit Catholic. I don't know. I'm completely guessing. Is there any information about this church? So this is definitely the focal point of the whole street, really, if you think about it, and everything seems to be. So if anybody was responsible for thinking we should plant some olive trees, it could be the church.
I mean, there's a lot of links between olive trees, right?
Yeah.
And the church and the Bible and the history.
We could just be making up history, you know? That's part of the fun of it. How did you first come across Crawford Street? Why were you there?
The first time that I was there, I used to work nearby, and I just walked by because I heard a great recommendation of croissants in that street. And on my way there, I started to see like so many olive trees, and we've counted, and I think it's about 20 at least, really established, huge. I mean, there were some that were maybe 5 meters high, I would say.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, they're evergreen, so all of the leaves were there. We found some final olives on the trees. Some were a little bit wrinkly, but of course, because of the harvest season has passed already. And it's phenomenal. We try to find out why there's so many olive trees in that street. But
we did ask a florist, which seems like the best place to ask.
Exactly.
But
and they were taking such good care of all of the olive trees. They had built a wooden box around the olive tree right next to their shop, and they had planted some companion plants, really like taking care of it, watering. But all of the trees really in the street were of phenomenal health. So I do think the council is taking good care of them.
Yeah. And even just some of the businesses had kind of potted olive trees out the front, and then we found St. Mary's Church, was it?
Yeah,
St.
we
Mary's
have another
Church.
one here, actually.
Here we
Another
go.
potted olive tree.
Let's swing the camera around so we can see. Here we go.
Beautiful as well. Yeah, it's very distinct. Olive trees are very distinct. You can really tell them apart by the long leaves. Very sort of delicate. And yeah. Bark. I mean, I don't know how I would describe this bark. It's just like typical bark. It's quite smooth. And the older olive trees would have a really big width of the bark, at least in Spain, all of our centenary olive trees, the bark is huge. Yeah, they're very recognizable by the leaves, to be honest. On the other side of the leaf, they'll be a little bit lighter, and then on the front side, they will be classic green. Yeah.
Brilliant. So we got a smattering of these olive trees all over the place, but we still don't know why. So
it's a mystery that will be solved.
But St. Mary's it seems to be like a focal point, and we had that nice little square in front where people sitting there. Even it's February, and there was a dozen or so people, or maybe more, all outside having coffee or lunch or whatever they were doing. Yeah.
There's a very Mediterranean flavour around the area.
Here as well.
Ooh, some sort of palm-related.
It's supposed to be fruit trees, but you know, you get a palm. Some nice trees blossoming around here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Muse, they're so special.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of the fruit trees that I found are in people's gardens, but gardens that are facing the street.
Yeah.
So they're not really street trees, but nearly. And that's where those are the key people, the prime candidates for me to ask them about where are these trees from, why did they planted, and how did they come to be?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I read a beautiful quote. I can't remember exactly, but it was when people are sowing seeds, it's not for their own enjoyment, it's for future generations' enjoyment. But knowing that you're planting something now can bring so much, like, so much beauty for somebody in the next generations. I mean, the trees that we're going to plant, they're not going to be mature at this point. But in 20 years' time, they'll be, hopefully, have taken care of just beautiful spaces. And it's a really nice thing to think about when you're planting a tree, that you might not get to enjoy the bountiful and the fruitness of it, but the generations will.
Yeah.
One of the orchards that we planted is literally next to a school.
Yeah.
And some of the school kids came over and helped us plant it. And it was just such a beautiful image to know that they were going to grow up with a fruiting orchard, and that's going to be part of their core life experience growing up. So yeah, that was beautiful.
So we have arrived.
Yeah.
I guess I'll call our destination from Baker Street to Hyde Park. So we're in Hyde Park.
Mm-hmm.
Very quiet here in terms of people. Is this Speaker's Corner? It is Speaker's Corner. Not too many people speaking right now, but that's fine. Seems to be a bit going on over there.
Yeah.
But that's not why we're here. We're looking for trees.
We are.
Fruit trees in particular.
Exactly. Not that many around here in Hyde Park, but we are hopefully on our way to St. James's Park, where there's a couple more fruit trees there.
What have we got in St. James's Park, do you know?
I believe there's medlar trees, there are quince trees, and there's a beautiful vegetable garden when there's actually like plums and potentially apples. I think there's a couple more there. Not that we're going to see any of those because it's February, so not that much fruit out at the minute, but we'll go and see. There's always a beauty of seeing the fruit trees sort of dormant in the winter months, and then you get to go there in the spring or in the summer and see the same tree in a completely different light. And yeah, there's a beauty to that thing.
Exactly. All right, so we're going to stroll through Hyde Park. If we see a fruit tree, in fact, if anybody knows of a fruit tree, let us know.
Yeah,
but
we'll report back.
If we find a fruit tree, we will share that knowledge. See, one of the questions that I supposedly was supposed to, I made a list of questions I'm making this film that I'm supposed to ask people is, during lockdown, during the lockdown walk, what was your unexpected discovery? But I think that's an easy one for you to answer.
It's such an easy one. Oh my God, all of the fruit trees that I found. I mean, starting from the apple trees, which I thought at the time was the best thing ever, to the plums, to the apricots, to the lemons, to the avocados, to the grapefruits. That was an epic time of finding amazing trees. And
you were living in Suffolk, weren't you?
In Bermondsey, yeah.
Bermondsey, yeah.
Exactly.
So, was there any, when you went out to walk, was it just within a certain, 1 hour cycle from your kind of loop from your house, or was there any sort of direction that you wanted to do, or is this exploring areas that you didn't know?
Exactly that, exploring areas that I didn't know. I used to walk the same streets all the time, going to work, coming to work, going to the tube. But actually I decided to jog my memory a little bit and actually take the routes that I had never taken before. And that's where all of this exploration start to notice different things in those streets, and you have the time to look into your environment, to look at the trees, to look at the buildings, to look at the views.
Yeah.
And those exploration walks were everything. Really, it became so exciting at a point where the world was on standstill, right? And I would see all of the trees continue to bloom, continue to grow, and that really brought a lot of solace, because you could see that the world was moving, that the trees were evolving, that they kept growing. And no matter what the situation was in the world, they kept moving on, and that really gave me a lot of hope.
I don't know if you're going to look at the whole lockdown experience as what was the moral of the story. That was when we paused, we explored. We didn't look out to the far reaches of the world. We just actually explored what was in our local vicinity. And lots of people have lots of different lockdown projects or things they discovered, and it's all quite hyper-local, really, which is probably the most interesting thing.
Completely finding all of those gems right next to your door. You don't need to go to the tropics to find an avocado tree. There's one behind the Tate Modern. So.
Yeah. I was reading a book, Wanderlust. Have you ever read that?
No, I haven't.
It's
heard about it.
Yeah, it's like a kind of history of walking and a social history of walking, and how it kind of started off in kind of Victorian times of people promenading. So like this would be the perfect space, you know, in Hyde Park. So there was the realm of the rich, and they would come here and promenade on a Sunday afternoon in their best wares, and their whole point was to be seen. And then got overtaken by the carriages, so then, you know, you'd show off your carriage or whatever. To the point where walking became sort of about adventure and about exploring the wider world. And then hiking, it almost became a sport, but not really in this country. In this country, it was more about trespassing, having access to nature, because everybody was working in cities and didn't have access to nature. So they were fighting for their right for access. But in the United States, it became a sport thing, and there are still so many magazines about hiking.
Yeah.
And they would say to each other, let's go for a hike. Whereas we would go, oh, let's go for a walk, because let's go into nature and try and find these pockets. But yeah, I forget the point, but
I actually read recently about the sport of orienteering.
Yeah.
Which I just assumed that it was a part of hiking, that you go through a hike, and in order to follow the hike, you need certain cornerstones for you to be able to direct yourself. But I researched the other day that it was actually considered a sport of like how quickly you could do that route and how many like specific figures you could find in the map. So that was something new to me, orienteering as a sport.
Have you heard of geocaching?
No, but it rings a bell, and I feel that yes.
So
like
that's the whole
Pokemon
thing.
Go.
There are these little hidden geocaches all around the country.
Yeah.
And you have to use compasses and everything to find them, and there's little boxes, and you open them up and they're on to the next clue. But it is Pokemon. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically pre-smartphone Pokemon.
We have found a fig tree.
And everybody passes along this really famous bridge and probably doesn't even notice it.
No.
And we've got little figs down there.
Yeah. This fig tree gets huge. It's absolutely humongous. It is beautiful. Completely beautiful. We are in Duck Island, which is a tiny little sort of island in St. James's Park at the far east side of the water, of the lake. And there's a beautiful cottage which used to belong back in the day to the gardener of the St. James's Park. And there's a beautiful vegetable garden, and I would say forest garden, because there's some orchards as well. There's some apple trees, some plum trees. It's a little bit difficult to identify which one is which at this point, but there's so many vegetables growing, chard, tomatoes, all sorts of things throughout the year. And it's a beautiful cottage. It's like fairy tale.
And it's a nice little point to finish off our walk. And we have to come back when all these trees are in bloom with fruit and
Definitely.
work out what we've actually got here.
Definitely.